Judges. The book of Judges is an intriguing book. There are many events and characters throughout this book that provides insight into Israel's conquest of the Promised Land. This is the context of the book. At the end of the book of Joshua, we see the death of Israel's leader. Under the leadership of Joshua, largely followed by God's way, and much land was conquered. Judges picks up where Joshua leaves off. The death of Joshua brings the need for new leadership to arise in Israel. Up until this time, Moses led Israel out of Egyptian captivity, and Joshua continued that leadership after Moses' death. The book of Judges shows just how God will choose to lead his people as they continue their conquest of Canaan. He will appoint specific people who are divinely gifted by God to lead his people, called judges. Hence the reason for the title of the book. There are 12 judges recorded in the scriptures that span the period between Joshua and Samuel. These judges provided both civil and military leadership. While the book's title is Judges, you will not see any reference to the term judge until you get to chapter 11, verse 27. This reference of a judge is used for God. He is the only true and rightful judge over his people. The book of Judges spans 300 to 350 years from the death of Joshua to the rise of Samuel. The book's author is anonymous, although we know that it was divinely authored by God, as all the other books of Scripture. Some scholars believe that Samuel authored the book, but there's really no clear evidence that he in fact did write it. Judges was probably written sometime between 1010 BC and 970 BC. How we arrive at this date is that we are told that the Jebusites were living in Jerusalem. Chapter 1 and verse 21. David captured Jerusalem in 1003 BC, and most of the Jebusites would have been gone after that time. What we do know for sure is that it was written sometime after its last recorded event in the mid-11th century. Judges is one of the historical books of the Bible, the others being Joshua, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. That is structured in a collection of individual stories dealing with each judge. Let me suggest a four-part outline to the book. First, we have the incomplete conquest in chapters 1 through chapter 2 and verse 5. In this first section of Judges, we're introduced to the state of affairs during the period immediately after the death of Joshua. And it forms the basis of the summaries of the book's message found in the latter half of chapter 2. In this section, we see continuing military activity, which shows that Israel had not completed its conquest of Canaan. The second section is the reoccurring cycle described. We see this in chapter 2, verse 6 through chapter 3 and verse 6. This section summarizes the condition of Israel following the death of Joshua, and it highlights the cycle of unfaithfulness on the part of Israel and the faithfulness of God to deliver. Which leads to the third main point, and that is the reoccurring cycle displayed in chapter 3, verse 7, all the way to chapter 16 and verse 31. This is the main body of the book. It tells the individual stories of the judges. And in this section, the cycle that was described in chapter 2 is seen repeating itself. Finally, we see in the fourth main section the epilogue of this reoccurring cycle in chapters 17 through 21. This last section of the book shows the complete defilement of Israel, concluding with, everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Some themes to be aware of as you read is this. First, the reoccurring cycle. That is very important when you read the book of Judges. This will become obvious as you meander through this book. You'll see throughout Judges a series of repeated events that happen over and over. You will see disobedience on Israel's part, then judgment by God for that disobedience, then Israel petitioning God for help, and finally deliverance that comes in the form of a God-appointed judge. The reoccurring cycle is this: disobedience, judgment, petition, deliverance. Over and over again, you'll see that throughout the book. And this reoccurring cycle gets worse and worse until we see the sad state of Israel at the end of the book. Another interesting thing about this book is that the term the angel of the Lord, it occurs 59 times in the Old Testament. 1/3 of that 59 is found in the book of Judges. There are many opinions as to who the angel of the Lord is. According to commentator Thomas McComiskey, he says, it is best to see the angel as a self-manifestation of Yahweh in a form that would communicate his immanence and direct concern to those to whom he ministered. While Israel continued to be unfaithful to God, he remained faithful. God's faithfulness is a major theme. Also, God's promise to Israel providing the land of Canaan is a major theme. Unfortunately, Israel's disobedience would sidetrack them from completely acquiring it. The purpose of the book, I believe, was written to show the end results of disobedience to God and to point the way to a leader, a king that would lead the people to God in righteousness. When people are left to do what is right in their own eye, then comes devastation and defeat. Deliverance only comes through the true deliverer, God himself. I think some things that you can look for as you read Judges is, one, how does God deal with sin? Israel had a history of disobedience and sin. And we see this throughout the Old Testament. God didn't excuse or ignore their sin. He dealt with it by allowing enemies to conquer them. How does he deal with sin in your life? A second observation. Why couldn't Israel conquer the land that God promised them? Israel chose to disobey and live according to their own passions, and it derailed their ability to take the land that God had promised. How does sin derail you in your pursuit of God's design or plan for you? Third, what is God's response to repentant hearts? Israel continually disobeyed God. They were brought to the point of seeing their sin and crying out to God. God responded in sending a deliverer. How does God respond when you approach him with a repentant heart? Do you see how God delivers you from personal sin and struggle? There are many other truths that can be gleaned from Judges. Ask God to show you himself as you read each day. When you approach this book, approach it with a view to see the faithful hand of God, allowing enemies to conquer Israel, his chosen people, so that they will turn back to him and follow his ways. God desires a people for his own possession, and I hope that you will be challenged as you read this book.